The lawyer slid one single sheet of paper across the table, and before I even read a word of it, I noticed something wrong. My husband's signature was already on it, dated 6 days ago, which meant Marcus had signed our divorce papers before he ever told me he wanted one. I was Elena Voss, 34 years old, and for 11 years I had run the books for my husband's construction company out of a spare bedroom we called an office. No salary, no title, just helping out, because that's what wives do, right? I sat in that glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor, my sister-in-law, Rachel, 2 seats down from Marcus, her manicured hand resting on his forearm like she owned it. And the strangest part wasn't the affair. I'd suspected that for months. The strangest part was the number typed at the bottom of the settlement. Half of nothing. Because according to this document, the company Marcus and I built together over a decade was worth exactly $0. I almost laughed. 6 months earlier, that same company had won an 8-figure contract. I knew, because I was the one who filed the paperwork. Marcus cleared his throat the way he always did before lying to a client. Elena, let's not make this ugly. You keep the condo, I keep the business, everybody moves on. Rachel nodded along, like a woman agreeing with a doctor's diagnosis she'd already written herself. I looked down at the paper again. And that's when I saw it, a clause buried on page 4, in language so dense it was clearly meant to be skimmed past. A transfer of company shares. Dated the same week, Marcus started working late. The same week, Rachel's name first showed up as a consultant on our payroll. I didn't sign. I didn't raise my voice either. I just asked one question. Marcus, who is Ridgeline Holdings? His face did something I'd never seen it do in 11 years of marriage. It went completely still. Because he thought I didn't know. He thought the woman who filed his taxes, who reconciled his bank statements every single month, who built the spreadsheet that ran his entire empire, wouldn't recognize a shell company with her own husband's mother's maiden name buried in the incorporation records. I stood up, tucked the unsigned papers into my bag, and said I needed 24 hours. Rachel smirked like I'd just conceded. She had no idea what I'd already found 3 weeks earlier, sitting alone at 2 a.m. with our company's financial history spread across my kitchen table like a crime scene. 3 weeks before that meeting, I'd noticed a payment. $41,000, routed through an account I didn't recognize. Memo line, Consulting R. I told myself it was nothing. Then I found another, and another. Over the previous 8 months, nearly $600,000 had quietly drained out of the business. Marcus always called ours whenever investors were in the room, and mine whenever I asked a question he didn't want to answer. So I did what 11 years of being underestimated teaches a woman to do. I said nothing. I smiled at dinner. I asked about his day, and I started pulling every thread I could find. What I discovered didn't just break my heart. It should have put someone in prison. Ridgeline Holdings wasn't just a shell for hiding money from me. It was where Marcus had been quietly funneling client deposits for a development project that, as far as the actual city permitting office was concerned, did not legally exist. He'd been collecting deposits from investors for phase 2 of a luxury build that had never been approved, never broken ground, and never would. Classic pattern. Take new money. Promise old investors their returns are just delayed. Repeat until someone stops asking questions. I was the one person positioned to notice, because I was the one person who saw every wire transfer, and I was the one person Marcus assumed would never look, because he'd spent 11 years training me to believe my only job was to stay quiet and stay grateful. He miscalculated. The night before that conference room meeting, I hadn't slept. I'd made one phone call instead, not to a divorce attorney, but to a former college roommate named Priya, who now worked in the fraud division of the state attorney general's office. I didn't tell her I wanted revenge. I told her I wanted the truth, documented, properly, the way courts actually respect. She told me something I've never forgotten. Elena, angry women get ignored. Prepared women get believed. So for 3 weeks, I became unbearably invisibly prepared. Back in that conference room, when I said I needed 24 hours, Marcus actually relaxed. He thought I was overwhelmed. He thought I needed time to cry it out with my mother the way I always had when we fought. Rachel actually reached for her water glass and took a satisfied sip, like the meeting was already over. What neither of them knew was that the 24 hours I asked for wasn't for me. It was for Priya's office to finish cross-referencing the wire transfers I'd already handed over, matching every dollar in Ridgeline Holdings to a specific defrauded investor. The next afternoon, I didn't go back to that glass conference room. I went to a different building, entirely a plain, gray one downtown, where I sat across from an investigator instead of a divorce lawyer and signed a sworn statement instead of a settlement. 2 days later, Marcus called me 11 times before noon. I let every single one go to voicemail. When I finally answered, his voice wasn't calm anymore. 2 auditors and a state investigator had shown up at his office that morning with a subpoena. He wanted to know what I'd told them. He wanted to know if I still had access to our financial records. He actually asked, and I want you to sit with this, whether I would consider getting our story straight before this went any further. Our story. As if watching my husband and my own sister-in-law forge documents to steal a company I'd spent 11 years building, then try to hand me a $0 settlement, was somehow a story we shared. I told him one sentence. I already told them the truth, Marcus. That's the only story I know how to tell. Rachel, to her credit, was smarter than Marcus in exactly one way. The moment she realized the state was involved, she called her own lawyer within the hour, not to protect Marcus, but to protect herself. Because consulting fees paid to a woman with 0 consulting credentials funneled through a shell company incorporated the same month she started sleeping with her business partner's husband is not the kind of thing that stays a marital problem. It becomes a criminal one. And criminal problems don't split down the middle. They land on whoever's name is actually on the documents. And Rachel's name was on far more of them than Marcus had ever told her I would find. 3 days after the subpoenas landed, Marcus showed up at the condo, my condo, the one he'd offered me so generously in that first, laughable settlement, and stood in the doorway looking like a man who had genuinely believed, right up until that moment, that consequences were something that happened to other people. $24,000 a month, he said. That's what the business generates. You could have had half of that for the rest of your life if you'd just signed. I told him the business he thought was worth sharing with me was never really the thing I wanted back. What I wanted back was 11 years of being treated like an employee in my own marriage. And the state investigators were going to give me something no settlement check ever could, an actual, provable record that I built something real, while he built a lie on top of it and tried to erase my name from the paperwork. He didn't have anything to say to that. For the first time in 11 years, I watched my husband run out of words. The case took 4 months to fully unwind. In the end, Marcus didn't just lose the company. He lost his license to operate as a contractor in the state, faced restitution orders to 11 separate investors, and is currently negotiating a plea that will very likely include actual prison time. Rachel testified against him to save herself, which tells you everything you need to know about what kind of loyalty either of them was actually capable of. I kept the condo. I kept my name off every fraudulent document, because I'd never signed a single one. And 6 weeks ago, I filed the paperwork to start my own firm bookkeeping and forensic accounting for small businesses, built entirely under my own name this time. People ask me if I regret not walking away quietly the day he handed me those papers. I tell them the truth. The version of me sitting in that conference room, the one everyone assumed would just sign and cry and move to her mother's guest room, that version of me is the one Marcus was counting on. He just never counted on the fact that the quiet woman doing his books for 11 years had learned to read a balance sheet better than his own lawyer did. He wanted a settlement. What he got was an audit. And in the end, the truth turned out to be worth a lot more than half of anything.